Hi class, welcome to the presentation for Chapter 3, Basis of a Healthy Diet. In this presentation, we're just going to hit some of the high points and I'll leave it up to you to read the rest of the chapter. So in this presentation, we will briefly be discussing the U.S. Dietary Guidelines, in particular the MyPlate Dietary Guidance System. We'll also take a look at food labeling, including the nutrition facts panel that you'll see on the sides of food packaging, the sides or the back, supplement labels and how they differ from foods and other drugs that are on the market, and finally we'll take a look at organic foods and organic food labeling. So let's glance at what influences our nutrient needs. Our individual lifestyles, our ages. For instance, babies will need different amounts of nutrients versus adults, your gender, your general health status, and use of specific medications. A good example is the antibiotics tetracycline and Cipro. You've probably heard of both of those. When they're combined with calcium in some dairy foods, it can keep the body from absorbing calcium. So you have to be careful when taking antibiotics, especially long term. Now, for many years, scientists have studied the impact that nutrients have on our bodies, and through the research they've done, they've been able to estimate nutrient requirements for a healthy human body. The nutrient requirements are the smallest amount of a nutrient that maintains a defined level of nutritional health or lowers your risk for getting a disease. Your body can store many nutrients in your liver, fat, and bones, and it will make withdrawals from these stores when the needs increase for those nutrients. Now, I'm not going to be speaking about dietary reference intakes in this presentation because I provided a video on the Blackboard site, but I need to make sure that you go over estimated average requirements, the recommended dietary allowances, adequate intakes, tolerable upper intake levels, and the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. So the DRIs, that's just a generic term for a set of nutrient reference values. That's what I want you to take a look at. Nutrition experts use these to make dietary recommendations, and again, just make sure you watch the video. It has some great visuals to help you understand these concepts. So the DRIs don't actually translate to amounts or servings or food, and honestly, they don't translate to any type of information that the average person can use on a daily basis. So, if we can't practically use the DRIs, what are we to use to help us choose a healthy diet? Well, nutrition experts have classified food groups and used the DRIs to develop dietary guidance systems, of which the current one is MyPlate. We'll discuss this in a few slides from now. These systems provide a more meaningful way for consumers to evaluate their diets and improve upon them if necessary. I'm sure you've seen the MyPlate visual before showing the 5 classified food groups, which are the fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins, and dairy. And although I am not going over all the food groups in this presentation, I'd like you to read about them in your text. I'm going to touch on grains, however, on the next slide. I chose to talk about grains for a few reasons, especially on the topics of enrichment and fortification. So included in the grains group are foods made from wheat, rice, and oats. Most of the pastas, breads, oatmeal, the breakfast cereals that you eat will fall into this group, and the major macronutrients in grains are carbohydrates and proteins. Now, grains can be divided into 2 subgroups. Those are the whole grains and refined grains. Now, I'm sure you've heard these terms before, but what do these actually mean? Well, whole grains contain the entire grain kernel with the bran germ and endosperm intact. This includes things like whole wheat flour, cracked wheat, oatmeal, whole cornmeal, and brown rice. Now, the refined grains group contains foods like white flour, degermed cornmeal, white bread, and white rice. These refined grains can still be a good source of vitamins and minerals if they are enriched or fortified. As I mentioned earlier, you've probably seen these terms printed on food labels, but you might not know what they mean. So let's discuss. Enrichment is the addition of vitamins or minerals to grain products that were lost during the refinement process. Refinement, unfortunately, removes much of the outer part of the grains in order to give the grain a finer texture and extend the shelf life of the grain in the grocery store because the natural oils in the germ and bran of whole grain can cause the grain to go rancid quicker. So the shelf life's a lot shorter. So you'll often see the term enriched on boxes of pasta or bags of flour in the store. Now, fortification is different because it's the addition of nutrients to a food that were never there to begin with. So, for instance, oranges are not a good source of calcium, but most orange juice is fortified with calcium. This is because most Americans fall short in their intake of calcium, and milk is also fortified with vitamins A and D. So, these were never in the food product to begin with, or were there in such small amounts that it really doesn't help you in the long run. I included this visual that shows what whole grains look like versus refined grains. And feel free to pause on this slide or go back to it later as it shows what the differences are between the whole and refined grain once it's been stripped of the main nutrients, in particular the bran and germ. So you can see the grain on the left has the bran on the outside. So if you've ever had brown rice, which you'll see in this bottom picture, you can see that it has that brown coating on it. That's the bran, which is filled with B vitamins and minerals. And then it also has the germ, which is the nutrient packed core with B vitamins, vitamin E, phytochemicals, and healthy fats. Those things are lost in the refinement process. But when they're added back, it can still be nutritious. You do, however, lose that fiber filled outer layer. They will add back B vitamins and some other vitamins when in the process of adding it back to the white rice. As I mentioned earlier, I do want you to read about the other food groups, the vegetable, fruit, dairy, and protein groups, and understand which foods fall into these groups. Now, I want to touch on the food guidance systems that have been around for about 80 years or so, the first one being introduced in 1943. I've included that one on the right side of the slide. It was called the 7 food groups. And because this was during World War II and Americans were still receiving food rations, the USDA made the statement that you could basically eat any foods that you wanted. And since food wasn't as available during wartime, that was okay. It didn't really matter what you ate as long as you had sustenance. Now, this was modified over the years, but was not significantly changed until 1992 when the Food Guide Pyramid was introduced. You may or may not remember the food pyramid. It really depends on how old you are. But this, in my pyramid was introduced and it was changed in 2005 when it became the first interactive system where you could go online to learn more about dietary guidelines and how to personalize your diet. So at that point, it went from pyramid to my pyramid. We're going to go to the next slide to discuss the current dietary guidance system. So earlier in the presentation, I talked about how DRIs are used to develop food guides for consumers to use to make healthy food choices. And in 2011, the current food guide system called MyPlate was introduced and it replaced the pyramid. You can see in the graphic that it's easily recognizable as a plate, and half the plate is made up of fruits and vegetables, with vegetables making up a little bit more than half, while the other half of the plate is made up of proteins and grains, with grains making up a little more than half of that side. A cup of dairy sits beside the plate to remind you to consume dairy. Specifically, they have done that so that you will include calcium in your diet. But you don't have to take in milk necessarily. You can use a dairy alternative as long as it has been fortified with calcium. MyPlate is also an interactive dietary menu planning tool, and you can visit myplate.gov where you'll find a plethora of information on it, link after link after link, from meal ideas to exercise guidelines for both adults and children. And those recommendations are based on the 2020 to 2025 guidelines for Americans, which are the most current ones, and you can read about these on the MyPlate website. The plate was designed to grab consumers' attention and to serve as a reminder for healthy eating. Obviously, you are not going to get any specific guidelines by looking at the plate itself. So, do Americans really use the tools provided by the USDA that are on the MyPlate website? We'd like to think so. However, just for fun, I conducted a very non scientific poll on social media among my friends and followers. I specifically asked if they had ever been to the MyPlate website, ever used the information, and whether they had ever seen the MyPlate visual. I had about 30 people respond to my poll, most of whom are quite educated, have access to computers and smartphones basically all of the time. Only 4 people out of the 30 or so said that they had been to the website, and one of those was me because I had to start the ball rolling. So really I only had 3 people who were familiar with MyPlate. I think the information on the website is being very underutilized, and the USDA, they have spent a tremendous amount of money on this without results that they hoped for. So we're going to skip on a bit to food labels. Now, you could spend an entire class on this, and in fact, I taught an entire course called Food Laws and Regulations, focusing most of the semester on what could or could not be on food labels. So you may use food labels when you're out shopping to figure out what type of ingredients are in a food product or what the nutritional value is of that food. Now, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA for short, is the agency who regulates what type of information goes onto food labels. When shopping, you will see that most foods are labeled with the product's name, the manufacturer's name and address, how much food is in the package, and the list of ingredients in descending order by weight. So, for example, you can see on this slide, whatever this product is, wheat flour, whole wheat flour, is the most abundant ingredient by weight. That will be the first ingredient that you see on the ingredient list, and I have a picture of this. So the second most abundant ingredient is water, then brown sugar, wheat gluten, and down the line from there. You won't see any nutrition labels on fresh fruits and vegetables because raw agricultural commodities are currently exempt from having to be labeled. However, according to the U.S. country of origin labeling law, the retailers must label the fruit or vegetable. They must put where it came from. If the fruit or vegetable is too small to label, like an individual green bean, you may see a sign listing the country of origin in that section where the green beans are located. But if you pick up an apple or a bunch of bananas, you'll usually see a sticker on it, and it will tell you where the product originated. So that's helpful if you're interested in learning more about where your food comes from. Breaking down the food label a bit, probably the most important part of the food label for the purposes of our class is the nutrition facts panel. Now, the percent daily values that you see on a food label are a guide to the nutrients in one serving of that food, and they are based on a standard adult diet that supplies 2,000 kilocalories per day, so it's actually quite general. Ideally, each day you want to get 100% of the daily values for fiber, vitamins, and minerals each day, and hopefully you read in the textbook that a food that provides less than 5% daily value of a nutrient is considered a low source of the nutrient. One that provides 20% daily value or more is considered a high source of the nutrient. So take a look at the graphic on this slide for this serving of food. The serving size is not shown here, but it provides 18% of your daily allowance of fat. And if you look at the bottom, you can see that if you eat one serving, you have 82% of your fat allowance remaining. But if you eat 2 or 3 servings, which is surprisingly easy to do depending on the food, you may have consumed much more of the allowance in just one meal. So be very aware of serving sizes in packaged food products because one serving of cereal may only cover the bottom of the bowl. And if you're like me, you pour at least half or more of the bowl without even thinking about it. I've actually measured out some of the cereals I eat, and honestly, a serving is quite small. Pay attention next time you pour a bowl of cereal because it's interesting to see how much we eat in one sitting and if it matches the actual recommended serving sizes. The format of the nutrition facts label was recently amended. It now shows calories per serving in a bold font right here. It now shows total carbohydrates in a serving and lists added sugars. The panel does not show information on vitamins A and C anymore like it used to, since we generally get enough of those in our diets. Now it includes information about potassium, down here, vitamin D, iron, and calcium. And in general, Americans get less of these nutrients than needed. So they decided to add these onto the labels so you can pay attention to it. So besides your daily value percentages, what will you find on the nutrition facts panel? You'll find your serving size, which was recently changed to reflect a better representation of what Americans eat in one sitting. So instead of having, if there's a package that comes with 2 granola bars in it, they generally have both of those as a serving instead of before where they may have just listed one. They're actually putting what Americans, a realistic serving size. So that includes information about fat, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates, including fiber, your total sugars, added sugars, and protein. Be sure to read about claims that can be on labels because I'm not discussing those right now. Although it is very interesting, yet often confusing, what claims can be on food labels and what can be labeled as being healthy or low fat or helping you with reduction of, for instance, heart disease. I did want to briefly discuss the labels that you see on dietary supplements because these are different from what you will see on foods or prescription drugs. Prescription drugs that are actually approved by the FDA. And by supplements, I mean vitamins, minerals, herbs, botanicals, amino acids, anything that's taken in pill, capsule, tablet, or liquid form that is claimed to be beneficial to your health. But you do have to be aware of possible risks associated with these supplements. What's important to remember, and that a lot of people don't know, is that the FDA does not review dietary supplements for safety or effectiveness like they do prescription drugs prior to their release on the market. It is purely up to the manufacturer to ensure safety. And in fact, the FDA only will step in when a problem arises once it is on the market. Then they can take supplements off the market and take action against the manufacturer. Supplement labels must include the name and location information for the manufacturer or distributor, the dosage, and a supplemental facts panel. Must also include the statement, and I'm sure that you've seen this if you have taken supplements or purchased any. This statement has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, and it's not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. So be very cautious when you're buying supplements. The ones in grocery stores or supplement stores are generally safe, but ordering online can be iffy if you don't really know where they're coming from, and you certainly want to do your research before taking supplements because, like I said, they are not regulated in the same way that prescription drugs are. So the last things I wanted to mention before closing this presentation is a little bit about organic foods. Sales of organic foods hit a record $55.1 billion in 2019, which was up 5% from the previous year, and interest in organic products is increasing each year. Organic foods are those grown, produced, or raised without the use of antibiotics, hormones, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides. They aren't genetically modified and they aren't irradiated. Usually, irradiation is used to extend the shelf life to kill any molds or bacteria that are on food products, but you won't find that in organic products. Table 3.12 in your textbook gives a good comparison between organic and conventional farming systems. So take a look at that to get a better understanding of the farming methods, and keep in mind that organic foods are generally not any more nutritious than conventionally grown foods, as this is often a point of confusion when people with people I educate about nutrition. They think that just because something is organic, it is not only more nutritious, but it may taste better. There are all sorts of reasons people may think organic is better than conventional. But with organic foods, there will definitely be a decrease in the amount of residue and pesticides. And as for labeling of organic foods, they can be labeled as organic if they meet the strict USDA standards. And you can see right here what the USDA organic symbol, what that looks like. If you saw this on a package of some type of food product or say a soup can, this would mean that it has met the standards of an organic product. Keep in mind there are different labeling categories, and some foods can have small amounts of non-organic ingredients in them and still be labeled as organic. So as you see on this slide, and I do buy this particular product for my family, so it interests me, this particular package of Annie's brand shells and cheese is made with organic pasta, but not all the other ingredients in the package are 100% organic. And you can look over the entire package and not see the official USDA organic seal on it because it does not meet the entire criteria for it to be called completely organic. Now, the company does make other mac and cheese products that are completely organic and do bear the seal. So if it's 100% organic, you can use the USDA seal on it. It can say organic, and it can still have the seal on it if it contains at least 95% organic ingredients. The remaining 5% of the ingredients are on the USDA's list of allowed ingredients, or it can say made with organic ingredients, like this package of pasta, which contains 70 to 95% organic ingredients. So sometimes it can get really confusing if you aren't aware of the terminology. It even confuses me sometimes when I am out shopping if I'm trying to compare organic versus non-organic. That was a very quick overview of this chapter. The high points I really wanted you to pay attention to. If you have any particular questions about food labeling or claims that can be on food products, or any of the 5 food groups or the food guidance systems, I would be more than happy to discuss this with you. We can set up a time to speak, or you can email me or post in the general discussion forum or my office. We can go over it. But these are all very interesting topics, and I hope that you will explore some of them on your own and as you are shopping. Thanks.